Luis Buñuel is remembered as one of the most innovative filmmakers of the 20th century, notable for creating controversial films that push the boundaries both in subject matter by covering a range of topics from politics to religion, which were deemed taboo at the time, and in presentation by pioneering new editing techniques and bringing surrealist sensibilities to cinema. The most celebrated and well-remembered works of Buñuel's career came at the beginning and end of his career when he made a series of highly praised films in Europe. However, it was his work in Mexico which brought him success as a filmmaker after decades of failing in Europe and the United States. 22 of Buñuel's 30 feature films were made in Mexico, spanning a multitude of genres throughout the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. Despite the golden age of Mexican cinema coming to an end, the Mexican film industry offered Buñuel a level of creative freedom he had not found in the rest of the world, which allowed him the opportunity to experiment and develop his craft, creating such notable works as Los Olvidados, Robinson Crusoe, and El Ángel Exterminador. In his book, A Search for Belonging, The Mexican Cinema of Luis Buñuel, Mark Ripley coins the term the Buñuelian bedrock, which refers to the core tenets associated with Buñuel, those being Catholicism, Surrealism, the bourgeoisie, and Spanish identity. Buñuel's Catholic roots go back to his childhood in Spain, where he was raised Catholic and attending Jesuit school. However, early on, he denounced Catholicism and became a lifelong atheist. These views on religion are seen in films such as Simon del Desierto, about the famed saint who lived on a pillar. Buñuel's critique of the bourgeoisie can be seen in films such as Belle de Jour. The film follows a young housewife of a wealthy household, Séverine, who feels unsatisfied with her life and begins working as a prostitute at a brothel during the day while her husband is away. The film starts with a fantasy Séverine is having of men in her life abusing her sexually, and these fantasies continue throughout the film. These scenes serve the purpose of showing how Séverine has become displaced in her environment. Séverine is bored by her respectful husband and fantasizes he would demean her, which leads her to seek out the brothel. The dreams also reveal to the audience the desire that Séverine holds inside. In the film's final scene, Séverine is seen waking up from another fantasy, suggesting that the entire plot of her becoming a sex worker may have just been a dream she had. The story brings up themes of sex and gender as well as the class critique, and features lots of surrealist imagery that Buñuel is known for. It was while attending the University of Madrid that Buñuel first became interested in surrealism and met the artist Salvador Dali. The idea of surrealism was to use illogical or unnerving imagery to capture the subconscious mind, and gain popularity in Europe after the First World War. Buñuel collaborated with Dali on the short film Un Chien Andalou, where they experimented with applying surrealism to film. The film is plotless by design and is meant to make no narrative or thematic sense. Instead, Buñuel and Dali were concerned with capturing the enigmatic state of dreams in the hope of expressing repressed desires and creating controversy among the upper class. Buñuel remained a controversial figure in Europe, making such films as L'Âge d'Or, which was censored for its depiction of religion and the bourgeoisie. This controversy led Dali to distance himself from Buñuel, accusing him of being a communist and an atheist. During the Spanish Civil War, Buñuel worked as a spy for the exiled government until he fled to the United States, fearing he'd be assassinated in Spain. Buñuel's Spanish identity remained a signature part of his films, including The Phantom of Liberty, which consisted of interconnected short stories set in and around Toledo, Spain. In the United States, Buñuel was unable to get funding for a film, but he did find work dubbing Hollywood films into Spanish for Warner Brothers. After World War II, Buñuel was forced to resign from his job due to his connections to communism and left the United States for Mexico, which was seen as a refuge for communists during the Cold War. At this point in time, Mexico had become a neutral nation, maintaining relations with both the United States and the Soviet Union. Because of this and Mexico's close proximity to the United States, Mexico became a popular destination for people of the US with connections to communism during the Red Scare. Buñuel was one of these figures finding work in Mexico's film industry. During this time, Mexico was experiencing its golden age of cinema, with films gaining a level of international recognition they had not previously had, and the government investing more in film productions. At the same time, Buñuel saw a level of success that he had not previously seen in his life. However, Buñuel's and Mexico's cinematic success was not simultaneous. When the golden age of Mexican cinema had reached its peak in the 1940s, Buñuel had only just started his career directing comedies and musicals on a low budget. As Buñuel found success making bigger productions and becoming one of the leading voices of Mexican cinema in the 1950s, the golden age was coming to an end. Today, Buñuel's filmmaking career in Mexico is remembered as being commercially successful for him, but a failure artistically, as the Mexican film industry limited what he could do creatively. While directing films in Mexico, Buñuel earned a reputation as a fast and efficient filmmaker, with all of his productions, aside from Robinson Crusoe, being completed in 24 days or less. The filmic style of Mexico was more traditional and focused on realism, while Buñuel was celebrated for his daring and avant-garde work, so this period of his career is usually ignored or seen as a failure by modern critics. However, this view ignores the content of his Mexican films, the surrealist style present within them, and the context of how Buñuel fit into the Mexican film scene. In 1950, Buñuel's film Los Olvidados is released about a group of young criminals in Mexico City. The film uses many of the features of neo-realism filmmaking that were popular at the time, such as hiring non-professional actors and shooting on location. The narrative focuses on the character of Pedro, a boy in the gang who helps their leader, El Giabo, track down Julian, who is also in the gang. When El Giabo finds Julian, he kills him, making Pedro an accomplice in the murder. After this, Pedro wants to distance himself from the gang and returns to his family, but faces obstacles. Pedro's mother wants nothing to do with her son, seeing him only as a criminal, and later Pedro is arrested and sent to a juvenile detention center for a crime he didn't commit. The film ends with El Giabo killing Pedro and then being gunned down by police as he tries to flee. In Los Olvidados, Buñuel captures a realistic portrayal of the lower class in Mexico City that shows how the poverty of time affected the youth through a tragic story. Pedro is portrayed as an innocent who wants to do the right thing but is failed by his environment, from his mother who disowns him to the government making false arrest. The film had a very pointed message that Mexico's current system was failing its lower classes and was considered controversial in Mexico upon its release. Internationally, Los Olvidados was praised for its themes and realism, winning Buñuel an award for Best Director at the Cannes Film Festival. While the film continues to be praised for its realism, it also notably features Buñuel's signature surrealist style. During the narrative, a dream sequence occurs which shows surrealist elements. The point of the dream sequence is to show the audience the inner workings of Pedro's mind. In the scene, we see Pedro's guilt for his involvement in the murder and his desire to be close with his mother. This scene shows that what interests Buñuel about this film was not the grounding it in reality, but exploring the subconscious thought of the characters, figuring out what their fears, desires, and morals are. In that regard, Los Olvidados is very similar to Buñuel's earlier, more experimental work. Los Olvidados doesn't just retread Buñuel's earlier work in terms of surrealism, but continues to develop his craft in new ways. With Los Olvidados, Buñuel shows an interest in developing characters in relation to their environment. Throughout the film, Pedro is portrayed as a product of his environment, who is forced into becoming a criminal because that's what everyone expects from him. We also see the internal beliefs of Pedro and how they are at odds with his environment, creating a character that is displaced and isolated. The thematic ideas of characters being displaced or isolated by their environment will continue to develop throughout his filmography and will become a significant feature of his later career in Europe. In 1954, Buñuel directed the largest production of his career, Robinson Crusoe. While it was made in Mexico, the film was co-financed by an American studio and is Buñuel's only English-language film. Based upon the popular novel of the same name, the film follows Robinson Crusoe, a man who is the sole survivor of a shipwreck who must survive alone on a deserted island for years. The story includes elements that are seen as outdated by today's standards, with Robinson Crusoe being a slave owner and the savages on the island being portrayed as inferior. For someone who made films that criticized many of these beliefs and preferred the creative freedoms lower budgets allowed, Robinson Crusoe is commonly seen as an outlier in Buñuel's filmography in a number of ways. Despite this, the themes and style that Buñuel filled his other works with can also be seen here. Robinson Crusoe continues concepts of isolation and character displacement and their environment from Buñuel's Los Olvidados. The film's narrative of a man stranded on a deserted island naturally brings ideas of isolation. However, what is interesting is how the film portrays Crusoe's relationship with his environment. It would be easy to portray the island as a cruel environment that punishes a protagonist, but instead it is shown as a paradise that gives Crusoe everything he needs to survive. Despite the warmth that the island presents, Crusoe still feels displaced in the environment, driving him to go mad. In a surreal dream sequence, Crusoe is visited by his father, who begins to mock and criticize his son as Crusoe expresses his fear of dying on the island. Interestingly, Crusoe's father is played by the same actor who plays Crusoe, and Crusoe slowly begins to look more like his father as the film progresses. The inclusion of the dream sequence allows the audience to see the subconscious thoughts of the main character, just like Buñuel's earlier work, showing that while the film may be more straightforward on the surface, Buñuel continues to use surrealist techniques in his works. Buñuel's 1962 film El Ángel Exterminador goes farther in its use of surrealism, with a narrative that critiques the religion and class structures of Mexico at the time. The film starts with a group of upper-class friends who arrive at a mansion for a dinner party. At the same time, all of the servants are leaving the mansion as fast as they can. The servants cannot explain or justify their actions, they only feel compelled to remove themselves from the property. The guests continue on with their dinner, mostly unaware of the disappearance of the servants, and find themselves in the music room of the mansion, where they spend the night. When they awake in the morning, they find that they cannot leave the room even though there is nothing apparent stopping them. Simultaneously, the outside world seems to be equally unable to enter the mansion, leaving the members of high society stranded inside. El Ángel Exterminador is a film about class divide, as the film's conceit is how people of different classes are forced into different places by invisible forces. Earlier in the film, one of the dinner guests speak of how they believe the poor are less sensitive to pain. This shows how the upper class can be uncaring of people below them and view the lower class as subhuman. As the upper classes remain trapped in the mansion throughout the film, we see them slowly descend into anarchy, showing how the upper class are not, as they claim, more respectable than everyone else. The guests turn on each other, accusing one another of being responsible for the predicament which leads to violence. During this period, Mexico saw great industrial growth, which caused the gap between the rich and the poor to increase, resulting in shifting economic and social structure. The film takes aim at these new situations in Mexico by exposing the hypocrisy of the upper class. Class isn't the only part of Mexican society that El Ángel Exterminador confronts, as it also takes aim at Catholicism. The opening and final scenes of the film take place at a church, letting the audience know that religion and faith are an important theme in the film. In the film's climax, the dinner guests are able to escape the mansion when they realize all of them are in the same position they were in the first night. This, however, is blatantly untrue, as a number of the guests were lying dead in that closet at this point in the film. This shows that the guests were able to escape through their faith in a false narrative. In the final scene, the group attends the funeral of the people who had died, only to show that they can no longer leave the church that they are in, along with everyone else in the church, implying that their escape was false and the cycle repeats itself. This suggests that the characters' belief in a false narrative cannot save them from the problems they face. Catholicism has been closely tied to the government throughout Mexico's history, and while it no longer is officially connected, the religion continues to have a large presence in Mexican society. As a notable atheist, Luis Buñuel seemed to be targeting Catholicism by making them responsible for the problems of Mexico's class divide. Buñuel's late career in Europe is celebrated for its innovative filmmaking, and rightfully so, but that doesn't mean that his Mexican works are any less significant. Much of what critics praise from his European phase was already present in his Mexican work, and his experiences in Mexico is what allowed him to find his success there later. More importantly, it was in Mexico where Buñuel was able to explore these specific topics freely after being chased out of Europe and the United States. His role in the golden age of Mexican cinema pushed the boundaries of what was possible in Mexican cinema at the time, and led to him being recognized all around the world, from the Cannes Film Festival to the Academy Awards. Lastly, his Mexican films are more representative of his work as a whole, with the vast majority of his films being made there and living in Mexico for nearly all his life, from 1946 until his death in 1983.